guys. You're watching Out of the Box podcast with Rosie Tran. I'm here today with a very special guest, Elizabeth Cunningham. She is a love coach and has a great following on Instagram. And she's going to be talking with us today about something really cool, ENM or polyamory. Elizabeth, how are you?
Oh my gosh, I am so good. How are you?
Good. I'm really excited to have you on the show talking about this really important topic. So for a lot of people who don't know what polyamory is, why don't you talk a little bit more? I know a lot of people refer to it as ENM, which is ethical non-monogamy,
Yeah,
or consensual non-monogamy, but a lot of people aren't really familiar with it in the mainstream.
yeah, yeah,
Obviously
for
people are
sure.
obviously people know what monogamy is. So why don't you talk a
Yeah.
little bit about that?
Actually, it's really funny because yes, I will talk about that. And it's funny because sometimes people don't even know what monogamy is because it's
Oh,
just
okay.
like, yeah, because it's just like the assumed, like I've had people where I'm just like, oh yeah, monogamy, blah, blah, blah. And people are like, what's monogamy? Just because
Oh,
it is it is the assumed relationship structure. And so it's not like we're like, oh, you're in a monogamous relationship. It's like, oh, you're in a relationship and it's assumed to be monogamous, right? Like if I said though, like, oh, I have like a girlfriend, like people would be like, oh, well, that's the only girlfriend that you have. And so anyway, so some people don't know what monogamy is. So monogamy means that you're with one person at a time. Traditionally, monogamy means that you're with one person for a life. But that's kind of shifted with like the cultural conversation of relationships and how relationships go and etc. And so polyamory is poly means many, amory means love. And so it means many loves. Most people who identify as polyamorous or practice polyamory um, want to have multiple relationships. So not just like, sexual really or just like sleeping with other people, which like if that's it, if that's you, if you just want to sleep with other people, like kudos to you. That's awesome. Like no slut shaming here. But polyamory is usually if you want to have multiple connected relationships, romantic or sexual relationships with other people at the same time.
yeah. So that can be like having several boyfriends or having
Mm.
a girlfriend and a boyfriend. And this is really important. I think the E part of the ENM, which is the ethical non-monogamy, which is that there's open communication between all parties. You're not cheating on anyone. You're not having affairs. And I just wanted to make that distinction because some people will have affairs and that's different.
Yes, affairs are different and like cheating can still happen in polyamory because people are humans and you can still lie about things.
Yeah.
Which it's kind of silly to me to like cheat in a situation where it's like no, like we agreed, like I've been cheated on in polyamory and I'm like, why? Like
Like everyone's open.
like why did you lie about that? Like it makes no sense. But okay, bye. And but yeah, no, it's a good distinction. And there's also like kind of a nuanced conversation around because like non-monogamy is like the umbrella term, right? So non-monogamy and polyamory are not necessarily synonymous. It's more like non-monogamy is like this big umbrella. Polyamory is just one aspect of that umbrella. Some people, yeah, like to use the qualifier like ethical non-monogamy or consensual non-monogamy. Some people are more on the train of like, why do we need to like make the qualifier? Like we don't say like ethical monogamy or like consensual monogamy, like we just say monogamy, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of different like thoughts and camps inside of like these terms as well.
Yeah, and if anyone
Yeah.
watching or listening wants to know a little bit more about the sociological background, we did have Chris Ryan, the author of Sex at Dawn, on the podcast 6 years ago. So I will throw a
Exciting.
link below with that original interview with Mr. Ryan, who wrote that book talking about kind of the origins of it. So I know a lot of people, there's a lot of poly kind of like baseline books like Ethical Slut, Sex at Dawn, and other things like that that people like to read. So he was a guest in the show way back 6 years ago. So
Yeah.
I'll have that link for some people who are more interested in the history of it versus like what we're talking about, which is kind of the modern day evolution, because it's becoming a lot more popular, I think, right? With the
Yeah.
internet and resources where people can get more information about it versus it kind of being like this secret thing that no one talks about.
Yeah, no, definitely. I've been practicing polyamory for 14 years. 14 years now. I'm like, how old am I? I don't know. Um, for 14 years, and definitely 14 years ago, there was not the amount of resources that there are now. It was definitely not as talked about as it is now. It was a lot like, I guess, more challenging to be out about it. But I've always been out about it. So I've just always been someone who's like, yep, this is who I am. Okay, let's talk about it. But yeah, there's definitely a lot more resources now, which is awesome.
There's a lot of myths and like weird information online too. Like
Yeah.
like I've noticed there's a lot of bad information online,
Yeah.
mostly from either people who, I want to say, tried polyamory and did it for the wrong reasons. Like
Yeah.
I'll see a lot of like blog posts or like videos from people who maybe they weren't polyamorous, which is totally fine, but their spouse
Yeah.
kind of like bullied them into it or pressured them into it. It was like, this is the natural state of the world. Like it's
Yeah.
natural.
Yeah.
Read this book, read this. And maybe their spouse also wasn't like a healthy polyamorous. They were just trying to have multiple partners, or they were someone who wasn't
Mhm.
able to be monogamous, which is totally fine, but they went about it the wrong way. So I've seen a lot of um kind of like vitriolic like
Yeah. Yes,
poly stuff
absolutely.
online.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, it's kind of funny because it's like, yeah, when you don't understand something, then it's easy to hurt people. Or when you don't understand something and then you misuse something, like it's easy to hurt people. And like I said, like in any relationship structure, monogamous, polyamorous, anything in between, people can still be manipulative. And I think that it isn't productive to blame like polyamory is a concept,
Yeah.
right? Like it's not like this entity that's like doing things to people. Like people are doing things to people. And so when we like blame polyamory for something, again, it's like blaming monogamy for people cheating. It's like, okay, is that a factor in it? Like, yeah, absolutely, because you have certain agreements, but people are going to, lie, cheat, manipulate regardless of the relationship structure. And it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the relationship structure. And for those people who have been in situations where their partner has used polyamory to manipulate or blame or like just misuse this concept in a way that was hurtful, like my absolute heart goes out to you. Like that fucking sucks, and I'm really sorry that that happened. And if you're practicing healthy polyamory, like that's not what that is,
Yeah, and I
right?
think that's a really good point that you're making, because people can cheat in monogamous relationships. People can be
Mhm.
toxic in monogamous relationships. I've been in abusive relationships that were monogamous. But I think it's really important to what you're saying is that the structure does not kind of absolve the individual from their responsibility. And I think that's
Oh
really
yeah.
important. Just in any structure, people will say, oh, well, socialism is evil or capitalism is evil, but there's people that are conscious capitalists and there's people that are, evil socialists or use socialism as a positive to like help the people. So
Right.
politically, socially, relationship wise, any structure is actually neutral, and it's the people inside that structure bringing about, the
Yeah.
evil or the hate or the harmfulness within that structure. So I think that's really important, because sometimes structures get blamed. Like a big thing is, oh, capitalism is evil, but there's people that are conscious capitalists who
Mhm.
will have a B Corp or a company that's doing good for humanity. So
Mhm.
the corporate structure isn't necessarily the evil that's happening. So I think
Right.
that's really important. But let's talk about some of the myths and
Mhm.
misconceptions that are out there, because I have
Yeah.
read every single kind of crazy thing that's like, whoa.
Yeah, definitely. So like yeah, like I think the biggest one is that like polyamory is just like, cheating. Where that's just what it is. Like people are like, no, there's nothing ethical about it. And it is just cheating. And yeah, like that's just very silly, because then it completely discounts all of the adults who are consciously creating these types of relationships and consenting and happy and enthusiastic. And so the like to like lump everything together and just be like polyamory is cheating is just very ignorant, in my opinion. And it's also like not listening to, I think it's like I think a lot of myths and misconceptions come out of just like not listening to people's like to other people's experiences, or considering that other people could have different experiences. Like I had a friend, or not a friend of mine, I ran into this person and they were like, oh, I have a and this is another like myth and misconception too. But they were like, oh, I have an unpopular opinion about polyamory. And I was like, oh, okay, like tell me what it is. And they were like, oh, well, I've never known anyone who has had a polyamory relationship that lasts. And I'm just like, okay, do you know all polyamorous people? Like,
Do you know every single polyamorous person in the world?
like ever for the past like 50 years, like to see, have you been tracking case studies? It's like, no, you're just like, oh, I've never known anyone. And it's like, okay, well, you don't know everyone. So why does your opinion like get to be weighted greater and for this whole community because you don't know anyone who has a quote unquote polyamorous relationship that lasts? Which what does that mean too? Like, does that mean like, and I asked them that, I was like, what does that mean? And they were like, oh, a relationship that's lasts more than 6 years, which actually funny story. I'm going on a date tonight and we're celebrating me and my partner is celebrating our 7-year today. So,
congratulations.
So I am also testament.
So actually there's a very famous couple that is a testament, and I think it was over 40 or 50 years, and it's one of the most famous people in the entire world.
Okay.
So Warren Buffett, I don't know if you know who that is.
I do know who that is. I am from Nebraska.
Yeah, Warren Buffett, who's one of the wealthiest men in the world. He's a billionaire. He was in a polyamorous relationship for over 40 years. His wife passed away. He was married to his wife, and his girlfriend was his wife's best friend.
I did not know that about Warren Buffett. I am so happy about that.
Yeah, he was open about it, and there's many interviews about it. His wife, they interviewed her, and her her explanation was, she said, Warren is a lot and he is too much for me to handle on my own. So she was a singer, a lounge singer, his wife, and she used to go and sing at this lounge. And the waitress at the lounge was her best friend, and they were actually in a polyamorous relationship. That was his girlfriend. They lived together. They all lived together in the house in Omaha, Nebraska. And when she passed away, he actually married his longtime girlfriend, and she became the wife. And you can look it up. You can Google it. This is like, they were together for over 40 years. They went on vacation together. The kids all knew about each other. And he is one of the most famous men in the world. So you can just tell this person that was over 40-year marriage, and his wife loved she wasn't bisexual. So the hierarchy was not that she was in a relationship with her best friend. She was in a relationship with her best friend as a friend.
Yeah.
Not as a lover, but they were together, and it's very well documented that they sent out Christmas cards together, and he would always say my 2 wives or whatever. So yeah, you can Google that. And yeah.
That's so actually, so that structure is called a V, right?
Okay.
And so Warren would have been the hinge partner then. So he's the partner that is with the other 2 people.
Yeah.
But those 2 people aren't together.
They're metamours, right?
Right. Metamours. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Exactly. They're metamours. And so that's a V relationship. And like some if those 2 women had been dating each other, then that would have been a triad.
A triangle. Yeah. So they were best friends. They knew each other very well, and they lived together. They sent Christmas cards together. And I mean, Warren is like 80 or 90 or something, and they were together until his wife died, and he remarried his girlfriend. So for that person who says they never, experienced it or never know anyone, one of the most famous people in the world is openly polyamorous and openly had 2 partners and sent Christmas cards out every year. And yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I know, I started practicing polyamory in 2010. So that's when I started like.
But what was the catalyst for you?
Oh, that's a great. So So
What's your
there's
origin story?
where's my origin story? Yeah. So there's kind of two schools of thought, or two things that people identify with, which is one is practicing polyamory. So you don't necessarily identify as polyamorous, like as a relationship orientation. You're just that this is just what you're practicing right now as a relationship structure. And there's people like me who identify as polyamorous. Like I feel like I've always been polyamorous, like some, I'm also queer. Like, so how I've always been queer, I've always been polyamorous. Even when I've been in monogamous relationships, which I failed at miserably.
Can we pause there really quick? Because
Yeah.
there is some controversy about identifying as polyamory. Some people see it as a lifestyle, and some people see it as an orientation. And then there is a group of subsect in the LGBTQ community that are very offended at considering it as a subsect of identification as far as the way you were born. Are you aware of this? Or
yeah, so I don't think that you can attack anyone for how they say that they identify. Like that is a part of who you feel that you are as a human being. And I understand, like, I don't identify as queer because I'm polyamorous. I identify as queer because I'm pansexual.
Yeah.
And I understand why. So there's kind of like a couple things going on with that, right? Like one is that, yeah, like if it's a part of your identity, then it means that it's how you feel about your inner world, your inner self, like how you are, how you showed up on this planet. And so kind of saying, especially if you are someone who identifies in the LGBTQIA plus community, like to tell someone else that it's like your identity isn't valid is a little hypocritical, because
I don't like that either. Yeah, I think
right.
the mentality is, so what I've seen is that people that are against that identification are saying, well, you're choosing it as a lifestyle, and I was born as a queer person, so that is offensive to me.
Right.
That's what I have heard. I disagree with that. I think that some people are born with the desire to love more and have the capacity to love more. And I don't think that that should be shamed in any way, shape, or form. The argument, I think, is that it's the poly community hasn't been technically crucified enough, and that the community has like suffered more. And I think when we compare this suffering like a pissing contest thing, it's not
Right.
a healthy thing, because people can be, ostracized for all sorts of reasons. But I do understand where they're coming from, but I disagree with it.
Yeah, and I think that the argument is more like, should polyamory be considered a part of the LGBTQ community rather than and I know that there's, but the thing is that, like, listen, people can argue anything. Like whatever words come out of anyone's mouth, someone can make up an argument about, right? Like and, which goes into a different topic, but like I think the main argument that I've heard is just not wanting polyamory to be categorized under the LGBTQIA plus like umbrella. And I agree with you that like, yeah, like comparing suffering is, that never ends well for any, like
That never ends well. And I think it's an alternative. It's not mainstream, really. So
right.
there should be some acceptance to it as a minority designation.
Yeah, and also like, for the hasn't been crucified enough argument, it's like, well, the more and more mainstream it gets, the more and more crucified it's going to be. So like, I guess eventually we'll be more crucified,
Anyone
like,
should be crucified. I don't think you should have to suffer and pay
I
your
agree.
suffering dues.
I completely agree. I 110% agree. I think that everyone should just fuck off. And
I mean, it's basically the same mentality as LGBTQ, because you're saying you should be able to love who you want to love, right? Without being crucified. You should be able to, if you want to love a man and you're a man, you should be able to live in peace. And the same thing with, if you want to love a woman, if you want to love multiple women, And another argument I've seen actually from the Christian right, and I will say that I am not attacking religion because I'm a spiritual and religious person, but an argument that I have seen from the Christian right is that, well, how would it work with marriages, or how would it work with, it would work like there's legal structures out there that exist
Right.
already. So I
Mhm.
really don't understand that aspect of it, because all we would have to do is carve out another legal structure. And I know of polyamorous people who own property with multiple partners, who own
Right.
pets and other things and have lives. And so I don't think it's that complicated. It's just a simple division of assets, or a division
Right.
of. So that's another argument that I've heard from people
Yeah.
that tend to skew more traditional.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, like, even if it is complicated, like, who cares? Like, it's not.
Yeah, like, why do you care about someone else's division of assets?
Right. Like, who cares? Like, who cares if it's complicated? Like, who cares if it's simple? Who cares if it's complicated? Like, it's not your life. It's not your choice. Why do you care? Like,
Also, those structures already exist. People have businesses with multiple business partners, right? Like,
right.
I could start a business with you. Like, say we wanted to do like a life coaching business. I can start a
Right.
business with you, and I can have another business partner that I do real estate with. So
Right.
that argument is kind of null and void to say, well, how could you marry multiple people, or how could you would have a separate contract.
You would have a separate contract.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like, it's not, and it really is like the our mindset, like, our mindset has so much to do with the arguments and with the blockages and with the ignorance and with like the nonsensicalness. Like, as humans, we like to think of ourselves as logical, but we're not. Like, we're not.
Most
We're
people are, yeah.
so, yeah, like, we are emotional creatures, but we treat ourselves like we're logical creatures. And then we, like, to boot, then we make ourselves right about shit. We're like, well, I think that, polyamorous people are complicated and weird and like just cheating and they shouldn't be given any rights. It's like, okay, great. Like, why do you feel that way? It's literally just because of the mindset that you have.
The best
It's
argument I've heard against it that's silly is, well, how can you love more than one person? I'm like, do you have more than one kid? And these are people that
yeah.
have like three
Do you have more
kids.
than one friend?
I'm
Do you
like,
love,
oh, do you only love one kid? Like,
right? How many people do you have in your family? Did you only love one of your parents? Well, maybe you did. Maybe you only love one of your parents. That gets complicated, but
okay, so sorry, we totally got off track. So back to your origin
yeah.
story.
Oh yeah, I forgot that that's what we were talking about. Okay. So yeah, so I did not know. I did not know that. I grew up in the Midwest. And so I had never heard of anything besides monogamy. And so when I started dating, like, and I started having multiple feelings for like multiple people, like, I just thought that was kind of normal, like, that you had to just choose one, like, you had to pick one and then kind of suffer in silence and just be like, well, cut your losses. But then, like, it got to the point in college where I was having a really hard time. Like, I was having a very hard time with the boyfriend that I had at the time in being in a committed relationship, because I did have like strong feelings for other people and I wasn't talking about it. So then it started to come out sideways. This is the thing about like when you're suppressing like who you are. And this is how, again, like, whoever is listening to this and is like, Elizabeth doesn't know who she is, like, okay, I want you to calm down and take 2 seats and then consider that, like, I know exactly who I am. Okay. Just give people the benefit of the doubt. So this is how I know, like, that this is like a part of me, is because when I tried to suppress this part of me, it started to come out sideways. Like, I would get drunk, I would make out with people, I would text people that I wasn't supposed to, like, quote unquote supposed to, like in a monogamous relationship, etc. And I would tell my boyfriend about it because I wanted to have as much integrity as possible. Like, I didn't want to be a cheater, and I felt terrible. Like, I literally hated myself for years because I was just like, there's something wrong with me and I'm a terrible person and I'm a terrible partner. And then he eventually broke up with me. And then I was just like, okay, like, I just had like a sit down conversation with myself that was just like, okay, are you going to hate yourself like for the rest of your life, or are you going to actually just embrace that this is a part of who you are? And I was just like, okay, like, I'm just going to embrace that this is a part of who I am. And so then I didn't even know the word polyamory at the time.
Yeah.
And so I was just like, I'm just going to start telling everyone that I'm going to date multiple people, sleep with multiple people, and then I'm going to tell everybody about it. And it's just all going to be above board. Like, that's just how I'm going to start operating from now on. And then it wasn't until several months later that I was attending these sexual education committee lectures every week. I was also, at the time, I was studying, one of my degrees is in gender and sexuality. And so I was also studying gender and sexuality at the time as well. And I eventually, with the lectures that I was going to, that they had a poly panel.
You're like,
and so I was like, yeah. And I was just like, oh my God. I was like, there's a word and it's called polyamory, and I'm not crazy. Like, I'm
I
not
wanted
crazy.
to,
Like, yeah, this is great. So anyway.
that's amazing. I wanted to address something that you said, because actually monogamy doesn't account for sexual variation. So you are queer, so you're attracted to, you're pansexual. So if you were doing the traditional monogamous structure, you would have to suppress your desire for different sexes.
Different genders. Yeah.
Yeah, and genders. So that's
Yeah.
something, you're literally suppressing who you are. So
Yeah.
if you're with a woman and you were attracted to a man, for example, you would have to choose one. And so
Right.
that is suppressing an entire side of who you are.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so, and for those people who don't know what pansexual means that you're attracted to people regardless of gender. So bisexual is like you're attracted to like all genders,
Yeah,
right?
so you would be attracted to whoever.
Yeah, so I literally I make the joke that I'm polyamorous and pansexual, so no one is safe from my love.
You're like, come here.
Let me love you.
You're like a puppy. It's so cute. You're like,
it's true. It's true. That's true about me. Yep.
yeah, and I have found actually, so it's very interesting that you mentioned integrity, because I have found that people that tend to lean poly integrity, I mean, obviously there's people like you said who use the structure to cheat or whatever, but
Right.
people that I've noticed that are really into the poly community, integrity is actually one of their number one values. They're not about cheating. They want everything to be above board. They want the kitchen table poly. They want people to, their partners to know about each other. That's what I've experienced from people in the community that I've met.
Yeah, no, I think it's really outliers that use I mean, it's just like monogamy. Like, most people in monogamy, like, this is what they want. This is the structure that they said yes to. This is like, they're just living their lives. It's the same with polyamorous people. Like, this is the structure that they said yes to. This is what they want. This is how they live their life, and like and being polyamorous and having multiple relationships, you have to have a higher level of integrity. And I don't mean higher as in people get this confused. Like, I don't mean that people who are polyamorous are better than people who are monogamous.
There's more people that you need to keep the stricter with.
Right, exactly. It's like, you need to have a higher level of integrity as a person who's dating, as opposed to someone who's single. You need to have a higher level of integrity as someone with one kid. And then you need to have a higher level of integrity when you have two kids, right? Because
there's more people being managed.
There's more things being managed. Like, you need to up level your integrity. The more complicated your life gets, the more integrity you need to put into place. And so it's not like a better or worse than, it's more of a practical thing.
Yeah, exactly. Because you don't want to accidentally withhold information or like you said, lie or cheat or do things that are integral.
Right.
Also, I feel like there's also a level of increased, like, so you mentioned people that think, well, you don't know yourself, but actually there seems to be an increased level of knowing yourself because you're dealing with more personalities.
Right. Yeah, no, you do. You have to be, that's one of the things that I help people with as a coach, honestly. Like, people think that I'm going to help them with their relationships, and I do. That's absolutely 110% like what I do. But like, the thing that I focus on with people is yourself and your relationship to yourself, and like the love and care that you have for yourself, and like any mental and emotional blocks that you have, such as shame from your past, or like ruminating thoughts about how wrong you are or how too much you are or anything like that. Like when you can have a solid relationship with yourself, it makes your other relationships that much easier, right? It makes it less challenging to really have that like knowingness of yourself. And that is like,
and like all that, because
yeah,
things come up. That's what relationships, they trigger you. They trigger your attachment issues.
yeah,
They trigger your childhood issues. They trigger your trauma. And that's what a lot of people don't understand, is that your childhood trauma and your attachment trauma can only be triggered through a relationship. Like the
right.
lady, the grocery store is not going to trigger your like deep rooted attachment issues. Right?
Right, exactly. It's like, no, it's so true. So actually, so a great book is Polysecure by Jessica Fern. And she talks about attachment styles specifically inside of polyamory. And it's exactly what you just said, where different people can trigger different things. Like I have partners where I have a very secure attachment with, but then I also have partners that trigger like an anxious attachment style with me. I have partners that have triggered like avoidant attachment with me, and at different times in our relationship, because as you move throughout in a relationship, different things happen, different things come up, different circumstances arise, and especially in polyamory too, there's like one of the things that I tell people when they're first beginning and like opening up is like like your relationship to change is like key and like tantamount, because things are always going to be, I mean, in life things are always going to be changing. And so if you have a really poor relationship to change, like you are struggling in life if you have a poor relationship to change, especially if you've been living in this world for the past 5 years. And like in having that solid relationship with yourself, it makes that your relationship to change a lot easier too.
Yeah.
Because like, yeah, people are going to be getting, like this past summer I started dating someone new, and so like it's not just me dating someone new, it's them making room in their lives. Like they have other partners, they also have kids, like it's also my partners making room for this new person in their lives as well. Like that's less time and attention like on my part, like being able to like sort that out. Like so it's when you start dating someone new in polyamory, like 10 people are affected by that, it's like it's
I know, it's not just like
yeah,
one thing, right? There's like more.
yeah,
It's like you're a manager at a company, and instead of managing two people, you're now managing 10 people or whatever. And
yeah,
anyone who has the business or work knows that it's like leveling up, right? So in
right.
a way, you're kind of like a relationship like superhero, right? Because you have to have more tools in the bucket because you're dealing with
Yeah.
multiple personalities.
Yeah, it's so true. Well, and I find I notice that when I am like talking to people in the, poly community, like you can notice people's different communication styles,
That's
and
huge.
it almost correlates with how long they've been practicing polyamory. And
Oh,
this isn't
interesting.
yeah, and this isn't to say that people who are like new have terrible communication, and people who are, you know, 15, 20, 30 years in have awesome communication,
But it's just a
but
skill that develops.
it's just a skill that like develops. And like so you really notice, it's just like, oh, I can really tell like the partners that I have, I think I've been practicing poly the longest of all of our poly constellation. And then I think the next person is like that they've been, non-monogamous for 9 years. So you can tell like people's
So what are
like
some of the communication things that you've noticed from someone who's
yeah,
just like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
jumping in the pool and someone who's like a vet?
Yeah, totally. So like so one thing is not being triggered as much.
Oh,
Like
interesting.
we're all going, or like being able that okay, let me erase that. I'm going to erase that. Let me say it in a different way actually. Um being responsive instead of reactive to being triggered.
Okay.
Like I notice that people who have been like, or this also happens with people in long-term relationships, but people who've been practicing polyamory for a long time are going to be less reactive in general, are going to be less reactive than people who have just begun, because again, it's a tool set that gets built over
Are
time,
you
right?
talking about to new partners, to jealousy, to things like
To,
that?
yeah, to really to anything, but like, but definitely to like, yeah, new partners, changes, different emotional behavior, yeah, like jealousy, being able to bring up conversations, like being afraid to bring up conversations versus just having the conversation, like, excuse me, like conversations about safe sex, conversations about what does your, you know, constellation look like. I use the word constellation. I
Constellation,
like it.
polycule, whatever.
Polycule, whatever. What does your constellation look like? Being able to talk
Boundaries.
about boundaries, being able to talk about agreements, being able to, like, you just notice the difference. And also, like, kudos to my like new poly peeps, where what the like the words that I hear come out of their mouth sometimes is like, well, I'm really new to this, so I'm not sure. And so like, awesome, like that is a great thing to say. Like, don't make shit up if you don't know. Like, like if you're new and you're just like, hey, I'm new to this, and like I'm not sure, that's a really good question. Like, ask questions, like assume that like people in the community want to tell you, and like want it. Some people are dicks, but like in any community, people are going to be jerks, but like, but most of the people, I would say, like in the poly community, like want to help people who are new, or who like are just fresh meat. I don't
Let's
know,
see.
I don't like I'm
So
saying
what
it all wrong.
so what information do you think poly people wish the world knew about them? Like, just since we're on this topic of like spreading
Mhm.
the information.
I think that polyamorous people wish that the world knew that it's just okay to be polyamorous. Like, it's okay. It's a like it's not a big deal. We don't like it's just people living their lives. It's not crazy. We're not trying to like ruin society or like anything like that.
You're trying to break down the nuclear family. You're trying to.
Well, some people are like, and I think that in some cases, the like, but this is the thing, is like that this is like the whole resistance to change thing, right? Where it's just like, okay, if the nuclear family works for you, fantastic. Just like if being monogamous works for you, fantastic. But if you want to have a whole village raise your two kids, like, what's wrong with that? You know,
And
like,
that's actually shown to be a more healthy environment for children. Like a lot of people, um, so I understand the value of the nuclear family, but actually it was something that was created in the 50s to sell microwaves.
yeah.
It is. I mean, it's a
I know.
marketing, it was
Yeah,
a
it's a
marketing
marketing
thing
thing.
to sell microwaves,
That's
but
what wedding rings are, a marketing thing too. Like, those are actually I actually figured that out with a partner of mine. I was like, I know that wedding rings were created as a marketing thing, but I do want a really shiny piece of jewelry.
yeah, no, and I'm sure, but the nuclear family was actually created in the 50s as a marketing thing, as those post World War II marketing things. So
Mhm.
when certain I'm going to say socially conservative, I have nothing against conservatives, but socially conservative groups that are very anti-alternative lifestyle, I would say that I do understand their aversion to the broken family, because broken families actually do have more issues,
Yeah.
more problems. But the more loving and supportive systems you have, because before 1950 we had extended families, so people live with grandma, uncle, aunt, and it,
Right.
it, it actually mirrored a polyamorous structure where
Right.
there was these large extended families living together, and that actually shows to be more helpful to children because they have more positive role models. And when there was a loss of a parent, for example, mom dies, they have grandma, aunt, uncle, whatever around,
Yeah.
and so that loss is lessened and it's less traumatic.
Yeah.
And
Well, and it
so I
also helps
encourage extended families.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also helps the, the adults as
Yeah.
well. Like
It
I
takes a
grew up,
village. That's where the phrase
it
comes
takes a
from.
village. That's the phrase. It takes a village. Because like I definitely grew up in more like my parents are not polyamorous, but like definitely the structure that I grew up in was very like adjacent to polyamory. Because like the neighborhood that I grew up in, like all the kids were kind of around the same age.
Yeah.
And then all of the parents were like really good friends and like helped each other out. Like I remember like when we were moving, we went over to like me and my brother like went over to a neighbor's house, and like, I call all the women who like raised me on this neighborhood like my moms.
Oh, yeah.
Like, and Cindy's mom was Grandma Shirley, like, and Grandma Shirley was just like the neighborhood grandma. Like no one, like everyone called her Grandma Shirley. All of the kids on the block were like, yeah, it's Grandma Shirley. Like, and when she passed away several years ago, it was like we all showed up to her, like she was our grandma,
Yeah.
you know? And so like, and I know that it was really helpful for the parents. And then if things are helpful for parents, it trickles down to the kids. It's like if my mom has extra help, like then she's less stressed in like moving, like we were moving to a different state, And so anyway, there's so many reasons why like like having a larger community is
Of
helpful
love
for,
and of love.
yeah,
That's what it's
yeah,
what is the problem with having more love? I think the issue in our
right.
society is we don't have enough love. There's too much hatred.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. It's like you have multiple consenting adults who all love each other
Yeah.
and who are willing to like work things out. Like how much of a better like role model for kids can there be? And with all of like you know and again, like this is a broad statement of just like I definitely know people who are polyamorous who are very lacking in communication skills, and it makes their life very hard. Um, but like in general, people who are polyamorous do have more communication skills. And so that's only going to help kids too. Anyway, I just think obviously I have a biased opinion about this, but that is something that I definitely wish that like the world knew about polyamory, is like how great of a support structure that it is for every single person. And I don't have any kids. Um, but like I know that like when I have had, you know, really difficult things happen to me, that I have a huge support structure. Like I have multiple partners and also my partners don't need to carry the load for anyone.
Yes.
Like we don't need to carry the load for anyone. Like if if I'm only able to give 20% to one of my partners because of things that are going on in my life or going on with me, then it's like I know that they're also going to be taken care of because there's other people in their life to support them as well. So I can give my 20% without feeling like ashamed or guilty, right?
I think that's something was very depleted from the nuclear family model, is having
Yeah.
one person be your everything, your best
Yeah.
friend, your world, your partner, your business partner,
Right.
your life partner, your the father to your kids, or the mother to your kids. It's too much pressure for one person when that is
Mm-hmm.
not the structure that we had for millions of years. We lived in a tribe. We
Right.
had grandma, grandpa, uncle, aunt, whatever, and multiple wives, multiple husbands, or multiple partners was actually the norm in our evolutionary structure for many, many millions of years. So
Mm.
I think that's really important to note.
Yeah.
And then as a spiritual and religious person, I mean, not to go super religious, but there
Mm-hmm.
is note of it in the Bible of people having multiple partners and multiple wives
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. So I find it very strange that the current structure religiously has been so obsessed with monogamy,
Mm-hmm.
because that's not, I mean, you can just like open the Bible and be like, this guy has like, it's right there.
Yeah, I'm a spiritual person, but I'm not a religious person, and so I cannot speak to that. But I believe you.
Yeah.
I've heard
Old
about it.
Testament was like super poly, okay? So
Yeah.
let's just say that. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
so say someone is monogamous, but they have
Mhm.
felt that they always wanted to share multiple partners. I think a lot of so I what I've noticed is that people that jump into the poly pool, what I've noticed is that they jump into the deep end in the wrong way. So what I mean is it'll usually be what I've seen is a monogamous couple and maybe the wife is bisexual and they're like, "Oh, let's get a third," which is like
Mhm.
a lot for
Right.
like to just have a relationship with two people right away. And I've seen that. So what is like the healthy, would you say, way to kind of like dip your toe in for people instead of just like
Yeah.
jumping into the deep end with no lifeguard?
Yeah. No, for real. Yeah, so just to like point out too that like how something looks takes years to cultivate, right? So if you see people, and also like a triad is not like the only structure
Yeah.
for polyamory, and also that a triad is like the hardest
That's
structure,
what I was trying to say. Like that's a lot
right?
to like have one person have a relationship
Right.
with two people.
Yeah, it is a lot. And also there's a lot of harm that can be done to the third
Yeah.
person as well if you don't understand how to have a healthy triad, which you don't understand. I want you to take the case that if you've never been in a triad, you do not understand what it takes to have a healthy triad. Like, okay, like I want you to humble yourself and like be like, hey, I know nothing about this. I just don't.
Yeah.
Like, just start there. Start with the knowledge that you know nothing. Humble yourself down. So that way, because okay, so this answers your question. Start to actually read about and research polyamory and and the community as well. So there's a lot of podcasts. I have a podcast. Multiamory is a really great podcast. Normalizing non-monogamy is a really great podcast. Yeah, my podcast is called Love and Life by Elizabeth Cunningham, shameless plug. And but there's a lot of, I have a podcast with my partner called Queer and Poly. So if you are queer and poly, our podcast is a pretty good resource. We've been getting a lot of great feedback about it, so that's really awesome.
And all the books we mentioned as
And
well.
all the books that we
Sex at
mentioned,
Dawn, Polysecure.
Polysecure. Yeah, absolutely. There's The Polyamory Paradox by Irene Morning, Why It's Okay to Not Be Monogamous by Justin Clardy. There are articles that you can read online. What's Alyssa Keegan has like a whole blog. Like there's so many resources. Like start like researching and just reading and listening. Like when you first join and consider that you're joining a community. Like even if you're not interested in like you don't get like a pin or anything like that. But like there's not like monthly meetups. Some of us I hold a monthly mentorship program, but like consider that you are joining this whole world and that you don't know anything about. So maybe hang back a little bit and like just observe for a while.
Yeah,
Um
I would also say it's like a person. I think a lot of people kind of
yeah.
fantasize and objectify and kind of have this like fantasy versus
Mm-hmm.
reality.
Yeah.
That's been my experience with people that I talk to is like they have this fantasy of how it's going to be, and reality is very different because people are very complicated. And like you said, they need to
Yeah.
have more integrity. They need to have more communication skills. They need to be, because you're dealing with multiple people that have feelings and emotions, and it's not just like
Mm-hmm.
you're like getting a dog, right? It's like it's a
Yeah.
person
It's
that
a
has feelings,
person.
and you're going to be having a relationship with both people. So that's extremely complicated.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. And also that if you are, because your question was like, what do you say to people who are like new and who are like
Yeah.
jumping into the deep end,
Yeah.
right? And because and I think that that's kind of why I brought up like different structures as well,
Yeah.
is like a triad is not the only structure, a V is not the only structure. You can be a solo poly person. So a lot of what we've talked about today has been from the perspective of being a couple already. But you can be just like a solo poly person. I did not know the term solo poly when I started out, but like hindsight 2020, that's probably, I guess that's the
That's what you
term.
were. Yeah.
I guess that's what I was. But and I also say to like start with why. Why do you want to? Why is this a thing for you? Because again, there are some people like myself who feel like this is just a part of who I am. But there's also some people where it's just like this is just they just want to practice polyamory, which there's no like good way, bad way, right way, wrong way, but there is a way that works better for everyone involved, and there is like unsafe or unhealthy practices. So again, like starting to have that mindset of like taking out like oh, there's a good way to practice polyamory and I need to figure out what that is, and there's a bad way of practicing polyamory, so I need to avoid that. Like kind of take out that binary and just go with, okay, what are healthy relationship practices and what are unhealthy relationship practices, and what are healthy relationship practices in polyamory and what are unhealthy relationship practices in polyamory, right? Like looking at it from a less charged perspective is going to alleviate a lot of anxiety, but it's also going to give you a better place to look, like to research from, to go from, than just thinking like, oh, what's the way that I need to like figure out? Like, there's no way that you need to figure out, but you do need to not be an asshole. Like,
All right, let's talk a little bit about your love coaching business. So,
okay.
what do you do? What is your love coaching related to, and how is this related to poly? Or tell us about your business.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a love and life coach, and I mainly help people who are non-monogamous or polyamorous or queer. Also, people are always like, well, if someone's monogamous, would you not help them? And I'm like, no, like I will have like these are just like the main people that I help, and like more in like my area of expertise, right? And so I do work with people one-on-one, and I also have a program called Love Deeper. It's a 6-month program where I work with people in a hybrid kind of fashion. It's one-on-one group and then an online course. And I've been doing this work since 2016, and I've been specifically helping people who are polyamorous since 2017. And this is the best way that I know of to help people move from wherever they're stuck at. Like, so if you're the person who's like, I don't know, I don't even know where to start, or if you're like, I started and it's not going well, or it's like, I know that I will do better if I have guidance, right? I hope that you're in that category. Like I know that I could do better if I had guidance.
Well, let's talk about that because you mentioned I could do better. How common is it for someone to dip their toe into the poly pool and have a couple failed polyamory experiences right off the bat? That's like the
Oh,
norm, right?
that's like super normal. That's like everyone. That's me. Like, oh my God, like I was a total shit show. Like when first, like if we like went back, like my first couple of years in polyamory could have been a great reality TV show. Like I wish that someone would have captured all of that on film. I would be famous with like millions of dollars, like because that was just so much drama.
So what are some of the pitfalls? So someone's getting into it. What are some of the pitfalls? What are some of the like red flags or things to look out for? Like I have a girlfriend who's polyamorous, and she said, she went through a lot of guys who would say they were poly, for example, and they were just
Yeah.
cheating. And so she learned to become get spidey sense on certain red flags, or like some,
Oh yeah.
or she had an
Ask.
experience where she was dating someone, or her boyfriend was dating someone, and then the girlfriend was trying to get him to be monogamous and leave his other girlfriend. So it's like I hear like
Right.
stories like that.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something that's going to happen. Not okay.
That can happen.
That can happen. Thank you. I was
Not
like, wait,
necessarily.
hold on. That's not like fated in polyamorous relationships. That's something that is definitely something that can happen. And again, it's like having that centeredness in yourself. But like some of the red flags to look out for are, I always ask people like, why are you polyamorous? Why did you start polyamory? What's been your polyamorous journey? Like the more questions that you ask, the easier it will be to hear the people who are genuine and to be able to kind of sniff out the people who are like, nah, like this is not, it's just like, does your wife know about this? If you ask someone, does your wife know about this, and they have a hard time saying yes or no to that question, that is a fucking red flag. Like if you ask someone a yes or no, does your wife know that you are on this date with me right now, and they waver in that, that is a red flag.
What about meeting metaphors? What's your
Meeting
stance on that?
Stance on meeting metaphors. You don't have to if you don't want to.
Oh, okay.
Like I think that we kind of get bought off by this like kitchen table poly, idea. Which is great. Like kitchen table poly is awesome. It's certainly like a goal to strive for, but you also can't force relationships either. Like if you're, I have two partners right now who are like, one partner is not interested in really having a relationship with the other partner, and that's okay. Like they have a relationship with me. Are there things that we need to work out because like they're not, buddies or on great terms or anything like that? Like sure. But you don't have to be friends with your metamors. But if you are a metamor of someone and you are not a fan of their other partner, you still need to be respectful of that relationship. And that kind of goes back to what you were sharing earlier with like red flags and stuff. Like if people aren't respectful of your other relationships, that's also a red flag as well. Like trying to dictate your other relationships, like overly expressing like their opinion about the other person, and like talking bad. Like I have an absolute, like, you cannot talk shit about like my other partners to me. Like, no, absolutely not. Yeah.
Well, we have to wrap up. Thank you so
Yay.
much for being a guest on the podcast. Wow, that hour like flew by.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for having me.
What do you want people to know about you? What are your social media handles?
Yeah. So what I want you to know about me is that if any of this has piqued your interest and you have questions for me at all, please reach out to me. You can email me at love@elizabethannecunningham.com. You can visit my website, elizabethannecunningham.com, or you can follow me on social media. All of my social media handles are ELZ Cunningham. So Instagram, ELZ Cunningham, Twitter, TikTok, it's all ELZ Cunningham.
And we will have links to all of that below in the show notes if you're watching this on YouTube. And if you're listening, then check out our website, outoftheboxpodcast.com. Guys, this has been Out of the Box Podcast with Rosie Tran. As always, I'm on Instagram, Out of the Box Rosie, and all other platforms at Funny Rosie. Guys, check out my OnlyFans. I'm now on OnlyFans, and I would love to see you and share some of my journey of sharing my body and my sexuality and body acceptance as I enter into middle age. Oh my God, I'm getting old. But I'm trying to show that as I get older that, being 20 is not the only way to be hot and sexy. And so I would love for you guys to join that. And I'm on onlyfans.com/funnyrosie as well. So check us out. This has been Out of the Box Podcast with Rosie Tran. Thank you so much.